Welcome to this session. We will get started right away, and I'm going to introduce the presenters. First of all, Marianne Mozak is the president and CEO at Ascend, a national membership organization, and they represent sexual risk avoidance field. She's a developer and lead trainer of Ascend's nationally recognized SRAE specialist certification program, and the author of Making Your Message Matter, a communication practicum for SRAE educators. Joining Marianne will be Tracy Pike, and Tracy serves as the executive director of Ascend, helping lead the SRAE field to achieve and maintain the highest standards of excellence for SRAE program nationwide. Tracy has also been an SRAE educator since 2000. So welcome, presenters, and Marianne.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you on day 2. And I want to just begin by giving a little bit of a presentation overview, what we're going to be talking about today. There will be 2 parts. I am going to do part 1, and Tracy will be doing part 2. In part 1, we're going to just very briefly look at the importance of understanding the mission and goals and objectives of anything you're actually attempting to do. And then we will specifically review the legislative guidance and the congressional intent and the required components for SRAE education grants, the required topics, which are often referred to as the A through F topics. And then we're going to also talk about some contraceptive guidelines. And then in part 2, Tracy will be looking at implementing those A through F topics by using a holistic and an optimal health framework. And then some practical ways you, as program directors or managers, can make sure that you are in compliance with A through F. So we'll dive right in. And understanding legislative guidance. We like to say that sex is always about more than sex, especially when we're talking about teens. And I think you're going to see from the guidance that this really helps us to recognize that teen sex and sexuality must be discussed in the context of life impact. The guidance goes beyond simply talking about puberty or reproductive anatomy or disease transmission or preventing pregnancy. It's a broader conversation that has to be had about life impact. And you can find this, we'll see how this is developed in the holistic approach toward optimal health. So let's begin. We're going to talk a little bit about mission alignment. And this is a picture of our landing on the moon. And just recently, we celebrated 50 years of having planted the flag on the moon. The quote there by Neil Armstrong, that's one small step for mankind and one giant leap for mankind. And during that celebration of 50 years, I started, reading about what it took to do the Apollo mission. And they had an assignment, they had a mission, a directive from the President of the United States at that time, who was John F. Kennedy. And basically, the president said, the mission is that within this decade, we are to land a man on the moon. So everybody knew the mission, but what I was intrigued by was the fact that they had to hire thousands, literally, of engineers and scientists and other supporting industries to make this mission actually be accomplished. And everyone had to know the mission and the objectives. And what they found out is in the people that they were hiring, they hired people who actually believed in the mission. And they realized that they would have a much better opportunity for success if the people working on this mission believed that it was possible to do. And we now know today, Elon Musk and Bezos and I think it's Steve Branson, all are trying to work on colonizing Mars, which if you know the atmosphere of Mars, you're just going to be like, that's impossible. But anyway, they are now recruiting people who actually believe that is possible. So knowing the mission and knowing the objectives along the way to get there is very important. And we're going to apply that to your sexual risk avoidance education programs, that everyone needs to be on that same page. So we'll continue and we're going to look at, and I want to just make, a comment here briefly on program fidelity and grant compliance. And it's clear that if you know the objectives and the mission and what the legislation actually says, you're going to have a much better chance of, adhering to program fidelity and grant compliance. And what we often find is that, the grant writer or the, maybe the program director knows all the intricacies of the legislation, the criteria, and what's required. But sometimes that does not trickle down, to the facilitator who's in the classroom or in any other venue where your program's being presented. But we have to remember that, the SRAE educator is your frontline delivery system for program fidelity and compliance. So this is an important session just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So we're going to look at the legislative authority for SRAE and examine, well, what did Congress intend this legislation to be? And I'd like to read the language, right from the legislation. And before I do that, I want to say, remember this, that legislative language is very intentional. Okay, so Congress, is very, they're very meticulous about what words they use to describe, anything that they're funding. And you can see why. If they're committing taxpayer dollars to a program, they want to make sure that that program is really doing what the funding is meant to do and what the intent was for the program. So let's read this. Congress has amended Section 510 of the Social Security Act in fiscal year 2018 to enable territories or other entities to implement education exclusively on sexual risk avoidance. Now, I took the liberty there of embolding the word exclusively. And why did I do that? Well, that really was something that Congress wanted to communicate, that this funding is for the sexual risk avoidance approach. This is not funding to be used for PrEP or any other program related to sex education. So this is where we get our legislative authority and directive. So Congress has also offered us required components. And the components really, what are the components? So every program, no matter what part of your program you're sharing, these components need to be informing how you present the information. And we'll just go through them. So the first component is to ensure that the unambiguous and primary emphasis and context for each topic described in paragraph 3 is a message to youth that normalizes the optimal health behavior of avoiding non-marital sexual activity. Okay, that's a big sentence right there, or phrase. So just taking it apart a little, let's look at the word unambiguous. When you look at it in its regular, definition from a dictionary, unambiguous means that it's not given to more than one interpretation. Okay, so they want it to be clear that the message for sexual risk avoidance is very unambiguous to those who are receiving program and messaging. And then the primary emphasis and context for each topic. And means that, we have the A through F topics. And, sometimes people say, well, I don't really want to, I just give a lip service maybe to one of those topics because I really want to get into healthy relationships or whatever. But actually, the legislative directive says that each topic needs to have priority. Each topic needs to be covered, and there needs to be a priority and primary emphasis on it. And all of the topics are to be communicated within the context that normalizes the healthy behavior of avoiding non-marital sexual activity. So we're always, when we're communicating the topics, we're always underlining it. We're always putting it in a framework and in a context that avoiding non-marital sex is a norm. We're creating normative behavior, right? We're normalizing sexual delay. All right, a second component to be medically accurate and complete. And I think we all know what medical accuracy, it's pretty straightforward. The legislation actually says that it's information, medically accurate information, is that information referenced in peer-reviewed publications by educational, scientific, governmental, or health agencies. And when we use the word complete, and it goes without saying, of course, you want to always have updated medical facts, or, and making sure that you're examining your curricula for that. So we have to be medically accurate with what we're sharing with our young people. And complete means that, its information is not selective. We don't have to exaggerate or underemphasize any pertinent medical facts. We simply share the facts, right? So that young people have all the information they need to make the best choices for their life. And then C, to be age appropriate. And this is an extremely important component of whatever we're talking about. And age appropriate in the general term there means the cognitive development for the age group that is being receiving, programming. So we're not looking at a subgroup, okay? We're not looking at a subgroup of the group, but we're looking at in its entirety, in the general population. What is the cognitive development? And there's a little more we can say about that. I could say a lot about all of these things, but in the interest of time, we have a lot to cover. But being age appropriate is an extremely important, especially as the culture changes and as different topics enter into our national discussion regarding sex education. And then being based on adolescent learning and development theories for the age group that's receiving that education. We always need to be saying to ourselves, okay, where are adolescents at in terms of their ability to process the information that I'm sharing, right? So it behooves us greatly, and Congress felt this, that's why they put it in here, that we would examine, certain learning and developmental theories that would look at the psychosocial and emotional and physical development of students. In terms of learning theories, how about, the social learning theory or the social norming theory, possible selves theory? Those then become a framework, a theoretical framework for us to communicate the information. And then finally, to be culturally appropriate and recognize the experiences of youth from diverse communities, backgrounds, and experiences. So this final component is, again, very important. And it's really important that we, as we go into different school districts or communities, that we are interfacing and interviewing the gatekeepers, because and assessing where the target population is. Who are these students that we're going to serve? Are they, and especially in the time of COVID, that's a very important question. How have the students in a particular district, how have they handled, the forced lockdown or, isolation or remote learning? Are we serving a group of students who are at high risk Are we serving students who are in foster care or juvenile justice system? Are we serving students who are from single parents? And all of this is to help us to be as sensitive and as effective as we can in communicating our message. So next slide, we're going to dive in, I believe, to the topics. And well, we're going to talk about the rationale. When you hear the topics that we'll discuss momentarily, please know that they're not just random good ideas, but they have been examined to address crucial areas of adolescent development that will empower youth, for their personal agency. And what do I mean by that? Their self-esteem, their self-efficacy. I can do this. Because what we're attempting to do is to help them in those areas that will help them be successful and thrive as they move toward adulthood. Okay, so let's look at the topics for A through F. A closer look. So the first topic, A, the holistic individual and societal benefits associated with personal responsibility, self-regulation, goal setting, healthy decision-making, and a focus on the future. Now, I know that there's a lot in there that I could talk about some of, all of those particular areas, but I regrettably will only just be highlighting some of those things in there. But let me tell you that there are many resources that the Administration for Children, Family, and FISB have created to help you on each one of these topics. So, but looking at the word holistic, I think it's really important because we're going to be talking about that later. But holistic means it's a philosophy that means that you cannot talk about the part without discussing the intimate interconnectedness to the whole. And that goes to the whole idea of life impact, that sex is about more than sex, right? And so it's a holistic. We want them to get that whole idea that the choices they're making regarding sex and sexuality, sexual activity has a broader impact, right? Not only on them, but also in society, because they're part of the human family. And then personal responsibility. And this, of course, begins way before they reach us in adolescence, but helping them to understand that is really developing that is on their way to adulthood extremely important. Just being prepared for class or doing your homework or organizing your time or showing up or showing respect for yourself or others is part. And, having activities that actually develop that and emphasize that is very important. And then self-regulation, so important. And again, I will direct you to the many fine resources you can find on the exchange regarding self-regulation. So what do we mean by that? Self-regulation is really an increase in an adolescent's ability to have self-control, to control emotions, to, like anger or disappointment, and helping them to connect the dots between, the discipline, the self-control and discipline they're going to need to achieve maybe a goal that they have, a goal for sports or arts or academic achievement. So self-regulation is really important to talk about and help them to develop. And goal setting. And, sometimes goal setting, we think, I know what goal setting is, but I changed my view on this when I heard an SRAE educator. She said she was teaching foster students. And every time she would go into class, this first thing the students would ask, they would say, well, what's the plan for today? What are you going to do? What are we going to do after lunch? How long are you going to be here today? And they would pepper with questions because, and she heard that so many times. She was like, I'm always hearing this. What is this? And she realized that, the students that she was serving come from such typically chaotic backgrounds and unstable environments, that having a plan was something that really helped them. So we think of goal setting like, oh, I want to be a computer scientist or, an astronaut or whatever, but they just want to get through the day. And so, helping students even just create a path forward with practical steps can be really a way for them to help build boundaries in their life, actually create safe spaces. So I think all students, whether they're in foster care or whatever backgrounds they're from, they can benefit by that. I benefit when I know if I get in the car, I know where I'm going. I might know where I'm going, but I need to know how to get there, right? So we all need that goal setting aspect in our life. Healthy decision making. Okay, so healthy decision making, right? We know that deciding is a part of life, right? We decide what we're having for breakfast or what shoes we're going to wear, but we're talking here about helping them to discern between what are healthy and unhealthy decisions. So, and a lot of times students are not seeing healthy decisions, but we want to begin to have those modeled, like staying in school or avoiding drugs and alcohol or leaving a relationship that's violent or coercive. And so we need to, help them with their critical thinking. Does this increase my emotional, physical, and material well-being? If this, and have them do that critical decision making to arrive at what a healthy decision is. All right, next, we're going to jump into the rest of the topics. We spend a little time there on A, but moving along. So B, the advantage of refraining from non-marital sexual activity to improve the future prospects and physical and emotional health of youth. Well, what's interesting about this is that when we talk about non-marital, what are we talking about? Well, it implies engaging in sexual activity without the advantages of the boundaries and the commitment and the support that marriage can afford, right? In terms of increased physical and emotional and often even financial security. So we're wanting to make sure that they understand that there are great benefits to this refraining from non-marital sexual activity because of the context of marriage and what it can afford. And then in terms of the physical, we know that in terms of sexual activity, that the number of partners is really a number one predictor of STDs or STIs. And so and there's a vast number of negative consequences from early teen sexual activity. So not only do we want to say, hey, here are the consequences, but here are the advantages, right? Okay, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving, so I apologize for how fast I'm talking here. So C, the increased likelihood of avoiding poverty when youth attain self-sufficiency and emotional maturity before engaging in sexual activity. I want to say up front that, poverty prevention it's really a complicated issue. And there are a lot of factors that actually impact poverty. And so we're not saying this is a silver bullet. But the legislation actually calls for examining the success sequence and the research in that because it lowers the likelihood of poverty. And basically, in a very quick fashion, what is the success sequence? If a young person graduates from high school, gets some kind of secondary education, it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree, gets a full-time job and waits until they're 21 and married before having children, they have a greatly reduced likelihood of living in poverty. And subsequent research, just very recent research, has actually validated that across all ethnic and socioeconomic demographics. So important component. And then D, the foundational components of healthy relationships and their effect on the formation of healthy marriages and safe, stable families. So I think there's a lot of consensus, right, about the need for healthy relationships. No matter what, no matter what approach you're using when you're teaching students about sex and sexual activity, healthy relationships, I think, is something we all agree really needs to be emphasized. But in SRA programs, we are asked to take it beyond and to connect that to the value of beginning those and understanding those healthy relationships in creating future marriages, in creating families, and providing safe and stable families because of the healthy relationship. Okay, and then moving right along, that was my hook to stop. I would like to go back though, Megan, and just say a few things. If we could go back one slide. There is a E here, and that's how to stop or talk about the risks that drug and alcohol use really increases the risk for teen sex. So that's important to emphasize with students. Okay, moving right along. This is a very important topic, and I will just very briefly talk about the need to help students to resist and avoid and receive help regarding sexual coercion and dating violence, and recognizing that even with consent, teen sex remains a youth risk behavior. So, in this era of sex trafficking and the Me Too movement, sexual assault, our national awareness is right up there. So talking about those red flags, what is the difference between dating violence and sexual coercion? One is typically romantic. One doesn't have to be romantic. It could be a teacher and a student, right? And then making sure that, that students have access to referrals, to hot numbers, to places they can go, trusted adults, if they find themselves in this kind of situation. And then finally, just sharing that having consent doesn't mitigate the risks for teen sex. So if two, 8th graders give consent to each other to have sex, they're still at risk, according to the CDC, because this is a risk behavior. So we want to take them beyond that kind of understanding, but really apply consent to, sexual violence and assault. And that was really the genesis of talking about consent in our national conversation. All right, and then finally, our last slide of this particular section will be about contraception guidelines. And basically, you do not have to talk about contraception. I will be honest, I don't know any SRA programs that don't. But if you do provide that, it has to be medically accurate and complete, as we talked about before. And students have to know that contraception reduces risk, does not eliminate risk. And there's been some confusion on that among our young people, especially in the talking about safe sex. And then you cannot, within your classroom, demonstrate or simulate or distribute any kind of contraceptive devices. All right, so that was a very quick presentation on the guidelines. And I'm going to now hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Tracy Pike, who's going to talk about the holistic and optimal health approach. Tracy?
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate it so much. And always good to hear from you. We're kind of doing a little bit of a rush because we really wanted to leave the time for the questions and answers at the end of this presentation, because I really feel like we get a lot of value from learning from each other. And since there's not going to be a specific breakout assigned to this topic, I'd really like to be able to allow you participating to participate in the chat and share some of your ideas of how to implement some of the information. So what I have the privilege coming out of, I think it's been mentioned a couple times, about 20 years in the field. Yes, I was just a child, but I'm going to try to give that some application to those of us in the field. having come out of the field I just presented a few weeks ago. So go ahead to the next slide, please. I want to make sure, I have a very good friend that she said, I think you're just ate up with this holistic health issue. You see it everywhere. And you guys, I do. Yesterday in our joint session, we were talking about human flourishing. And the entire presentation, I'm going, there's physical, there's mental, there's emotional, there's social health, there's, spiritual, ethical health. I mean, I do see it. And here is my point to you about that is I want you to see it. Also, I want it to frame everything you see and do in the field because it creates optimal health. And let's look at this definition together. I'm going to kind of chop it up a little bit and talk about it in sections. But optimal health is a dynamic balance of physical. Here you go. We're going to walk through it. Emotional, social, spiritual. If you are not comfortable, or maybe you're in a public school and you don't want to use the term spiritual, there are those of us of people of faith that certainly see things as spiritual, but you could also use the word ethical. I like to use both at the same time, and intellectual, which some of us consider mental. So optimal health is this dynamic balance. Because I know you guys, I have a child, I have a daughter and a son, actually I have children. I need a lot more for my daughter in high school to just not get pregnant. Or my son just to not get an STD. And as Marianne even said, sex is always more than just about the topic of sex. It's holistic. And so optimal health is this dynamic balance. And when we give so much emphasis to one over the others, you can see an imbalance coming and it's going to create unhealthiness. So lifestyle change can be facilitated. This is what the work you do. It can be facilitated through the combination of learning experiences. That's what we do in the education field. We provide these learning experiences that enhances awareness, but it's not enough that young people know that, teenage pregnancy is a possibility with sexual activity or STDs are a possibility with sexual activity. Knowledge is not enough. It has to also increase motivation, which I'm continuing to read here on our definition. So not only do I know it, but I believe it and it means something to me. And I think I can apply it, which is the next, building skills. And most important, through the creation of opportunities that open access to environments that literally make positive, healthy practices easy. So that is the hard and difficult yet honorable work of the SRAE field, is to make sure that we always focus things holistically. And when we say optimal health, I feel like it's kind of a little bit of a buzzword in our field, optimal health outcomes. What does it mean? It means exactly what this definition entails, that it is holistic, and it is right up the alley of what you are in the business of doing in the SRAE field. So I want to talk about just how do we practically do this then? And here we go again. I saw through the A through F components that Marianne just unpacked for us, and I'm going to give some emphasis on and then practical application to from my own experiences. And I'm seeing this holistic conversation and mental and emotional and social and relational focus, all just come to the surface. So I'm just wanting to emphasize, I'm not going to reread every detail of these A through F because Marianne did a wonderful job of unpacking those, but look at A, the focus of the holistic individual. All right, so how would we unpack this, or what would be a practical implication or application in the classroom? All right, so if we're sitting here explaining it to you as educators, and I know you all know what holistic health is, but I'm talking in a 6th grade class. What does holistic health mean in 6th grade? So let's imagine, using illustrations. I think one of the best things a mentor of mine taught me was that you already know these concepts. Children already know a lot of these concepts in other areas of their life. So to show them how that is true. Let's talk about holistic again then. I bring a pie in today. What if I could deliver a pie to all of you all watching and on your Zoom, and the doorbell rings on time and it's a delivery and it's a peanut butter pie. And you unwrap this peanut butter pie and then you smell the peanut butter pie and you say to me, "Oh, Tracy, that was so thoughtful, but like I have a peanut allergy. I cannot eat peanuts, and I say back to you, oh, wasn't that cool that you got the pie right on time, but just eat around the peanuts. Don't worry about it. Just eat around the peanut ingredient. And you would reply, it is in the pie. Like you can't just pick apart and eat around the peanut if you have a peanut allergy, if it's an ingredient to a product, right? So holistic means that one part of the other part, it's not dissectable. This is my hesitation with using a holistic pie chart where you have the physical, mental, emotional, social, separated. It almost looks like a piece that you could remove and then put back and not affect the rest, which it's not possible because we're ingredients. So, I'm not saying we shouldn't use a pie chart to illustrate some of those these concepts, but just making sure we unpack it and give it practical application to the student. Let's look at B for a moment, the advantage of refraining from non-marital sexual activity to improve future prospects, physical and emotional health, right? On the physical and emotional. So students should be able to logically, it's our job as educators to connect the dots, right? For them to understand that those who are not sexually active, will not worry about having an unplanned pregnancy or getting an STD or an STI. I mean, helping them to understand the advantages, the advantages of, I like the things that were coming up here in the chat, you guys. It's superb illustrations. And that is exactly what we're talking about, how we learn from each other. Soup, mosaics, things that are components that can't be easily dissected. So anyway, the physical and emotional advantages to refraining from sexual activity. When you present it as such a restriction, then that's, I don't know about you, but I don't love restrictions, but if you can kind of frame it as a celebration or an investment into a future, it's not a restriction, it's an investment, and getting young people to connect those dots as well. Let's look at C real quick for the sake of time. Increased likelihood of avoiding poverty. We just talked about, and the self-sufficiency and emotional maturity before engaging in sexual activity. We just talked about the success sequence in the Brookings Institute. And I saw a lot of you putting some information in the chat, wanting more information about the Brookings Institute study, and we'll get that to you. But again, unpacking this with young people, and Marianne mentioned the age appropriateness, it's been my experience in sixth grade. Sixth graders are trying to get through, let's say, lunch or the day for the weekend. They're not thinking marriage, right? But if we could unpack and not just present and inform data and research like the Brookings Institute study on the success sequence, but literally unpack, this is what the social norms say lead to, avoidance of poverty. If you will, get an education, the more the better, and secure independence, get a job, and then get married before inserting children into your life. 98% chance you will not live in poverty. Now let's think through. So if we did not get those done in that sequence, how could a baby, an STD, what would that cost? What would that mean to the future? How would that impact you? It is our job as the educators for practical application, not to just to teach the information, but to get young people to absorb it and critically think through it and own it and decide for themselves they want it, and empower them with the tools to obtain their goals. Let's go to D, healthy relationships. The impact and the formation on marriage and families. This is a focus on social health, right? And so it's what we have done, what I've experienced in curriculum I've been a part of, is sometimes, like, let's say again, in that sixth grade program where I'm like, I don't want to talk about my puberty experiences. Nobody wants to hear a 54-year-old woman talk about when I went through puberty, and we don't want to talk about, make it so personal to the child, like you may experience this, So we had created a character where, hey, Matt is going through puberty, and let's talk about, what Matt might experience. And Matt, if he's got this relationship with these friends, and what does a healthy relationship look like? How could Matt draw boundaries for people who are unhealthy? What's healthy look like? What does healthy not look like? You can see some practical application there of walking students through without letting them critically focus. The reason for the third party like illustration too is to avoid a student from having to confront maybe their own unhealthy environments. We speak with many students that do not live in their biological, the home of the biological family members and such. And so you never really want them scrutinizing the adults that are in their lives, but we can be objective as to this would be what's healthy, what's not healthy. Let's look at E real quick. Other risk behaviors such as drug and alcohol, use the CDC's own 6 critical health behaviors and have people understand, how should they be responding? How would Matt, let's say a character, respond if he wanted to be healthy? And how could one increase the chances of other high-risk behaviors being participated in? And lastly, how to resist and avoid and receive help regarding sexual coercion, violence, youth risk behaviors. I want to make sure you understand, I had the privilege through my work to talk with a lot of people with a lot of curriculum, and I'll just give you a couple practical applications. I had one very good friend share with me that they just made sure that they wrote on the board, or maybe she had posters, I can't recall, the hotlines, the local area hotlines, and every student was instructed to write it down so that all students were writing it down in a place that they would be taking home and could then reach out to on their own time. I think it's pretty important that they would be embedded maybe in your program material if a student has a take-home booklet, because there might be family members that might need to access those hotlines as well. So I hope that gives you just a couple practical applications. Could you go to the next slide, please? And I guess bottom line is, next slide. The bottom line is that I want to make sure that we aren't just trying to stuff our, all these like A through F guidelines. As Marian mentioned, they're intentional. They're very specific, but they are the framework for our curriculum. It's not the other way around. We shouldn't take our framework of our curriculum and then try to paint in, oh, did we talk about this? Did we talk about that? It should be the framework, and our curriculum fits into it. So the holistic health and the A through F criteria as a grant recipient should be the framework of our presentation, just not mentioned here and there to meet criteria. Next slide, please. So here's how we would ensure that, okay? We would want to crosswalk our curricula through the A through F criteria. Many of you on here who may have contributed to your grant writing efforts would probably know what A through F means and criteria, but many of you on here aren't part of that grant writing process. And, some of you are going, oh, I didn't know when you wrote a grant that this was in there and different things like that. It would be so wise of us to crosswalk our current curriculum, even as a presenter, with the criteria so you can identify, where it is present. Be super specific with that. Where do we teach holistic health? It should be throughout the entire presentation, but like, where do we talk about, one of the specific A through F, like, emotional maturity or marriage or social relationships and such. I think you get what I'm saying there. And identify any areas where your criteria is absent. A lot of you may have written a grant because you noticed some criteria is absent and you're adding that criteria now. So if you do notice that there is a discrepancy and that you're not meeting all this criteria, contact your curriculum author as soon as possible regarding absent criteria. Maybe you're misinterpreting a particular a skit or application of some sort. Do you have the most recent version? Is the author aware of the deficiency and maybe they're editing it themselves? And if you are writing your own curricula, then just make sure that you make the necessary adjustments to have all the presence of the entire A through F criteria present. And don't forget to match your information that the criteria is providing for you with, it's just such a huge responsibility to make sure that it is not just, we have all kinds of differentiated learning styles. So it not is just present like in print, but that it would be in a script so that it's being said, it's in print, it's on any multimedia that you're using, that it's present and synced, let's say, for lack of a better word. So emphasizing and contextualizing the holistic health approach by the criteria. Okay, this is how you emphasize and contextualize it. You conduct annual required trainings for all your staff. Every speaker should know why A through F exists, what it is, what it means, and how we can. Haven't you experienced this where you might have showed up at a presentation and someone else shows up at a presentation and they look very different, the presentations? And they will, because we are different people with different personalities. But the host should always know to expect at least the same information is being covered, right? So conduct your annual required training for your program staff. Audit the facilitators' presentations by regularly scheduled observation. This is so uncomfortable, you guys. I know it, but it's so vital. It helps the presenter know how they're being perceived, what they might be missing. It helps the listener or the observer, the criteria, collector, or the critique collector of information, kind of learn from the presenter. It's a win-win. It's uncomfortable, but it's very necessary. Make sure you have updated script materials. It takes time every year to make sure you're using the most medically accurate, up-to-date, materials, information, and that it has been disseminated in all the ways I just previously discussed. Review your multimedia materials, just as I mentioned. Inspect and edit printed materials also that might be handed out to students, like, a take-home assignment or a quiz or something that is also distributed to students. And don't forget your pre and post surveys as well. And scrutinize your website information and parental supplemental information. And in case you thought I was talking fast, I kind of talk fast anyway. So I should have warned you, put your seatbelts on. This is my last slide for commentary at least, but without continual growth and progress, which is what we are doing, that's what we are funded for, such words as improvement, achievement, and success have no meaning at all. Quote by Benjamin Franklin, who also said, by the way, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that is what SRAE education is all about. So now that's the reason we stopped. And I wanted to hurry to stop at the 2:30-ish mark, was to offer some time for conversation, for questions. Marianne is back on. I saw in the chat where she had to hop off for a second, had a problem. But Jerry has been nice enough to post the success sequence, the Brookings Institute information that you were looking for, many of you. It is such a valuable study. It's valuable for students to walk through. Remember to make sure it's an age-appropriate walking through, because the sixth graders are just trying to get through lunch, not get up to the marriage point, but setting those goals in incremental ways. So let me open that up for questions then. And Marianne, I think you're back on. And put your questions in the box, or maybe raise your hand and we can see if that will work.
There was one question, and Marianne, you could probably answer this. Mm-hmm. It was a question when you were referring to the legislation and you put in the actual USC code number, mm-hmm. which I think was probably the Title V number for the legislation. And one of the attendees said that their grant was under a different number, which I suppose is probably the general departmental legislative number. And so do you want to comment on how those two interact and harmonize?
Yes, there is, the bureaucracy is big, let's put it that way. So there is the general departmental, which is the SRAE standalone. Title V is really the authority that I was reading from that you saw on the slide. And then there is the competitive Title V also. But they all really emanate from that authority of the Social Security Act. They're all within that house, as if, to kind of make it a simple illustration. Does the person who asked the question, do you have any idea, do you know what kind of grant you're working on? Are you on general departmental? Are you on a standalone SRAE, or are you in
They
competitive?
gave the other number, so I assume they're under general departmental because it wasn't the same number
Okay.
that you had on the, so I think you answered the question. And we
Okay.
might also just mention to attendees that that both of these have been harmonized in the FOA as well. So they can check the FOA, but I believe the FOA on all three of the streams talks about the A through F topics. But if they have a question about that, please talk to your federal project officer.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment, Jerry. They have all been synced, as it were, with the A through F topics.
I see another question. Jamie Hill says, with so much great content that can be taught to students and with a very limited amount of time we get with them, how do you prioritize what content to cover? That is a great one, Jamie, because I've seen myself do that so many times. Like I'm just trying to, here's the unfortunate reality is we must deliver the content. It has to be delivered, right? So it all has to be covered. That unfortunately means sometimes I have found myself less storytelling, which I know is how I personally try to relate with people. But we are there not for entertainment value, but for educational value. And we have a responsibility to cover the content. So I have had to ask for more days of content in the classroom because I bear the responsibility. And I've had program people ask me, can you just come for 3 days, even though it's a 5-day program? You have to make a executive decision not to compromise the content, because you can't say in 5 days what you, or in 3 days, what you were supposed to say in 5 and do it effectively. So most of the partners, educational partners, are just so grateful to have us covering the content. Don't compromise any of an A through F item. I wouldn't take less days. I would ask for more if anything else, but I totally get the dilemma. Maybe people can also put that in the chat. Maybe there are other subsequent ways that you could cover that. I know many of you have videoed your curriculum content because the schools were not in session, and you could offer those as supplements outside your presence maybe. That's why we really wanted to leave this last few minutes for us to be able to dialogue about that. Does anybody else have ideas in the chat? My just advice was don't compromise. You have to cover them all. I did see someone else say something in the chat that I wanted to say.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes, while you're looking for that, if anybody has ideas of how they overcome that conundrum, please post that in the chat. And if you have any other questions, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left.
I have a suggestion for overcoming that time lap. Sometimes you can leave behind worksheets, supplemental materials that a teacher, especially teachers who are so grateful that you're in there covering these kinds of topics, will actually then pursue. It's not ideal, right? But it definitely gives the opportunity, at least, for some of the, if you want to have a broader conversation about particular topics.
I think also, Marianne, providing a quiz on the content is very helpful because it allows the educator, you could write the quiz yourself, and it kind of allows the educator to collect a grade over, the 5 days that they gave you to present. And they usually find that as a real nice help. And it will also, help cover and measure the content that you did get covered, give you more educational dosage, so to speak.
Okay.
Enjoyed some of the mentions in the comments about the different illustrations that you could use on holistic health as well. The mosaic, the soup. You can drop your ideas, not just your questions, in the messages, so we can all see those as well.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to just have a shout out to all of you. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Yes.
We really esteem you, and we know that you're just doing a Herculean job out there, especially with the challenges of remote learning and the topic itself. So thank you for your dedication and the passion that we know you bring to it.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary Ann and Tracy. And if anybody does put additional things in the chat, we'll collect those and we'll get back to you if there's some questions that need to be answered. So thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.